will absolutely affect relationships. That will affect the Republican Party going forward. But long story short, states, parties, all function differently and all discipline differently, are going to take different actions. I believe the Utah Republican Party chose specifically not to censure Senator Romney. But at the end of the day, it's the voters that put these representatives and senators into office. It isn't necessarily a positive thing to be censured, but at the end of the day, again, it's the voters. And so there are no automatic ramifications. And of course, individuals can get elected without the blessing of the party of their state or the national party. President Trump was actually an example of that. So we'll see what happens moving forward. I know the Arizona Republican Party actually censored Cindy McCain, the widow of Senator John McCain. So it's a show for the party of that state that they don't agree with whatever the person did, but again, what the ramifications can be might be none at all. Then lastly, immigration issues. We had issues with families being separated at the border. We still have DACA. So there's a long list, and certainly there is continuing frustration that actual legislation has not been passed. So again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but it is a lot of work for any administration to come in facing, and such a very difficult mix. You have the pandemic, you have social unrest, attack on our Capitol, the impeachment of a former president. It's a lot. Okay, so some of the major hurdles that, so you have the issues, some of the major hurdles that the Biden administration is going to have to face. A polarized nation. This is nothing new. This is certainly a trend that we have seen, but it is getting worse, where much of the country is grouped into one side or the other, and it's frustrating from a policy perspective, of course, because our Constitution was actually written in a way to force compromise. And if both sides are so far apart and they're not willing to come together, nothing happens. And that is very frustrating as a citizen, of course, when you want to see Congress move forward or take some type of direction. But that is absolutely where we are. False information about the presidential election. So there's still a lot of polls showing a high percentage of individuals, showing that a high percentage of individuals believe that Biden stole the election, that there was a large amount of fraud, and this false information, these beliefs prevent the administration from moving forward with the entire nation. And of course, there are still people that are not going to be supportive, but and I'm certainly not saying that people who voted for Trump are automatically going to come over and support Biden, but this is certainly a different dimension, that such a high number of people actually believe that Biden, it's not their opinion that he shouldn't be in office, but that he legally should not be in office. So the ongoing criminal prosecutions, specifically related to the U.S. Capitol. So a number of individuals from all over the country have been arrested based on their participation in the attack on the U.S. Capitol. The participation level and what they're charged with has ranged, but that will continue to go forward. I don't know if there theoretically could still be criminal proceedings regarding President Trump. So this is, again, we're less than 2 months out. And so it will take some time to really understand what happened. Even though the impeachment trial is finished, there's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of questions that need to be answered. And so that will kind of color this first 100 days as well. Back up to that, my previous point, just real quickly about the false information. There are also several high dollar civil suits that are taking place, that are suing a number of individuals. I know I've seen organizations and individuals, Fox News, Lou Dobbs, Rudy Giuliani, because and some of these, not sure about every single one, but a number of them, especially the ones that are billion-dollar lawsuits, are some of the companies that make the voting machines, because there was a lot of information about the voting machines not working, functioning and correctly, et cetera. And so that, of course, is detrimental to those businesses. And so they are suing those false claims. Okay, so we have the split in the U.S. Senate. So Kamala Harris, as vice president, will cast the tie-breaking vote, but that makes things tricky. It's not a sure thing when you're passing legislation. It's never a sure thing, I would say, even if you have a majority on both sides, that every single member of your party is going to follow the same direction of the president if they're the same party. But that 50-50 split is going to make things difficult. Also, we have the 2024 presidential election, and I know that probably seems bizarre to mention that here, given the fact that we just had a presidential election, but I actually tell my students that the next presidential election essentially begins the day after the previous presidential election. There's always speculation about who is going to run. The person in office, maybe assumed they will run not second term, but there's immediate speculation about who their competition will be. And so this is a unique scenario in that there is a strong amount of speculation that Donald Trump will run again. He's even beginning speaking engagements this week. So that's a big question mark. Traditionally, previous presidents don't become actively engaged in the next president's work. They kind of stay in the sidelines, help as they're needed on a kind of nonpartisan basis. But I don't think that that is going to be the case here. Also, due to Biden's age, there's certainly a lot of speculation that he will not run for re-election. So then that equates to speculation on both the Republican and the Democratic side about who the next candidate will be. So we'll see. And another interesting point here to think about looking ahead to 2020, if Biden is not going to run for re-election, that I hesitate to use the term lame duck president early on, but he's not running for re-election. So that kind of affects how people kind of attach themselves to him in some ways. But for him, policy-wise, he may feel a certain freedom to enact legislation or go different ways that he maybe would not, go in different areas that he may have shied away from if he was thinking about re-election. So I don't have any predictions necessarily, but it's just an interesting dynamic. I kind of, there are certainly presidents that haven't run for second terms, but obviously Biden is older. And it seems that we're starting these presidential election cycles, at least unofficially, earlier and earlier. Okay, so actions taken. So talk about major issues, some of the major hurdles. So what has he actually done thus far? So President Biden has signed 31 executive orders. I don't think that has increased since I last updated this. He's signed a lot. Certainly there was a flurry at the beginning. I'm sure we've seen pictures of the stacks of of executive orders that he signed on the first day, and he's continued to sign executive orders. Not all of the documents that he has signed have been executive orders, so some are memorandums and proclamations, so other executive actions, but not executive orders. But he has done quite a bit of that, and more so than any of his more recent predecessors. So many of these executive orders have overturned policies from the Trump administration, so overturned existing executive orders. So some of the most notable: reversed the ban on transgender Americans joining the military, canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. The United States has rejoined the Paris Accord, which is related to climate issues. So a lot of executive action. So another question that I got, or one of the questions that I was sent, that's I'll call them pre-questions, about the executive orders. So these are executive actions. They are not statutes. They are not legislation passed from Congress. So there is a difference. So essentially, the power of executive orders is not specifically mentioned in the U.S. Constitution. It's not defined by federal statute, but it's argued that they are implied in the second article of the Constitution, which explains the executive branch. And they've been used, since George Washington's administration. But the office of the presidency has become stronger and stronger over time. We're seeing these used more, and we're seeing them used in different ways. So there are some questions regarding some of these actions, whether they are constitutional or not. Certainly, executive orders have ended up in the courts before, with that very argument that they are constitutional, that there is overreach. So, will any of these end up in court? I can't say. Certainly possible, but they are, at the end of the day, not legislation. And I think, and this goes back to the polarization, with this heightened polarization and sometimes it seems like inability of Congress to move forward, presidents have started to step in. Well, I'm going to take action if they're not. Certainly there are arguments on both sides, whether that's constitutional behavior. But I will say, it's a continuing trend. This is not something that it's just President Biden. So how this will turn out, kind of the future of this flurry of executive orders, I can't say. We'll see, again, if we end up with some court action. The beauty and the madness of the Constitution is it gives us instructions, but there's a lot of gray area. And a lot of that is intentional to allow for flexibility and growth, but that means we have to kind of duke it out, so to speak, debate it out, hopefully civilly. But there are always some growing pains to figure out what needs to be done. Certainly there are issues today that our founding fathers could never have conceived of. And the presidency is stronger, partially because, presidents have kind of gradually added to that in some ways, but also situations that require more decisive executive action or action that is better taken by the executive branch. Again, there are people who argue a number of different positions on these issues. So President Biden is also working to confirm the rest of his cabinet level appointees. So at last count, there were 7 confirmed. He still has, I believe, 26 left. Merrick Garland is currently going through confirmation hearings right now. So we will see how fast Congress or Senate specifically, how fast they begin to move on these confirmations. Going back to the hurdles, that's another hurdle or another dimension of the impeachment trial hurdle is if the House is involved in the impeachment trials, as the managers, and the Senate, they're the jurors. While that is happening, other things cannot be happening, i.e. confirmation hearings. And so that was initially one of the concerns about the impeachment trial, was that was going to take away from Biden's agenda, which of course that is the consequence of taking on those actions, that you're not spending the time confirming the additional cabinet level appointees. Also, disaster relief to Texas. So this is ongoing declaration of disaster areas and sending aid to Texas. Texas obviously had a huge natural disaster with the huge winter storm, and so there are a number of continuing issues that Texas will face. And I believe that Biden is scheduled to visit Texas, or that idea is being entertained. Of course, all of these actions are being colored by COVID. One of the questions talking about visiting foreign countries and things, things that a president might normally do to really integrate himself into the executive branch and visit allies. That in-person action is just, in-person interaction is just not happening. Okay, so what is next? Well, hopefully there won't be any other major issues that come down the line. But so the Senate will continue to hold confirmation hearings for President Biden's cabinet level appointees. So that is moving forward now. The COVID relief package. So that is also currently being worked on in Congress. The last target date, I believe Majority Leader Schumer said March 15th. That is the date that I saw in one of the more recent articles that I read. So a target date to be on President Biden's desk. Of course, that doesn't mean that it could arrive before, after, but somewhere in that range. Of course, that's still a good 2.5 weeks from now. At issue, of course, are the size of individual checks that will be sent out, different credits for tax credits for children, unemployment, relief to small business owners. So there's a lot that's a part of that's that relief package that is being debated. And then lastly, disaster relief to Texas. So these are just 3 of the most immediate directions that the administration will be going. Again, going back to the slide of the issues that are facing, there's certainly no shortage of other concerns that the administration will be addressing. But it's again moving, I think, not slowly. He's certainly taking action in a number of areas, but he's having to wait for the confirmation hearings and some other things that are moving a little bit more slowly due to some other issues and concerns. So got through that a little bit faster than I anticipated. So it will, I think, continue to be a very interesting year as we hopefully move out of this pandemic scenario. We see restrictions lifted, et cetera, and we can focus on other issues. I think that right now, COVID colors so much of what is happening. It's hard to look much beyond that, with the immediate issues that are taking place. But we will see. I feel like every day in politics is a new day, and you never quite know what is happening. But like I said, I think all political scientists and probably citizens in general say a little prayer each night, thinking, please, let's just hold off for any major political events. Let's kind of play a little bit of catch up. I think I'm sure all of you have seen. There are many memes out there, but thinking about next month, which is March. So next month is March 2021, and we still haven't recovered from everything that happened in March 2020. So need a little bit of catch-up time. Okay, so I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions that I hope that I can answer. So I will, I guess, go ahead and open that up.
Yeah, I actually have some questions, Dr.
Okay.
King,
Okay.
related to you that have been coming through the chat and also through email and all of that. So
okay, perfect.
The first question that was brought up by one of the participants is, why did the Republican Party censure their own elected officials? And what does the censure do for those officials?
So it's just essentially a show of disagreement of whatever the action that office holder took. It doesn't necessarily have to be office holders. So I mentioned Cindy McCain. She's not a current office holder in the state of Arizona, but was censured by the Arizona Republican Party. She's certainly a notable Republican figure, but she has been very supportive of President Biden. So she was censured in that way. So again, just a show of disagreement with whatever action that was taken. What it actually means, I don't know specifically for each state. So, you have the national party, but each state has its own party that functions for that state only. The Arizona Republican Party, Texas has its Republican Party, and California, and they all operate differently, and they all operate under those state laws. So what one state Republican Party does, it doesn't mean that another state is going to agree with them, even though they're also of the Republican Party. So at the end of the day, it's a show of disagreement, but there may, and I'm just speculating here again because every state is different. It may affect the party giving them money or something along those lines, some administrative issues. But at the end of the day, it's the people who elect the representatives. So it's nice to have that support, but it can, individuals, candidates can certainly go around.
Thank you. There's another question about, why do we have executive orders if they are typically overturned by the next president? What are the benefits of going through a process that could be overturned by the next person?
Well, theoretically, everything can be overturned. So, legislation can be rewritten. The Supreme Court can alter its course, not go against precedent. So there can always be changes. So, I don't know that would necessarily be a deterrent, thinking, I'm going to do this because it's going to be changed. No, you are going to initiate policies that you are supportive of and that you believe in, and during your presidency, even if they're undone 4 years from now. So I don't know that thinking that they might be undone would necessarily be a deterrent. So the executive orders, so certainly there are arguments to be made that some executive orders are overreach, but some are within the president's power. The president is the leader of the executive branch. That is, I do not know what the total budget is off the top of my head, but a very, very large budget, millions of employees. So he certainly does have, or the president certainly does have, some discretion in how the executive branch functions, and he's the leader of that branch. So they do serve a purpose. But again, certainly there are arguments to be made that some are overreach and should actually be legislation from Congress as opposed to an executive order.
Great, thank you so much for outlining that. Another question that we have is, what are your thoughts on the COVID relief bill as it currently stands? Is it a smart use of money? And is it true that there's a lot of allocation for aid outside of the US?
I am not sure specifically about the aid outside of the United States. It's certainly nothing new for us to provide aid to other countries. I do not know specifically what is in the bill. My general opinion about the bill, I mean, I know people who have small business owners, for example, that have really felt a strong benefit from, these protections, obviously the unemployment protections. I think one of the criticisms of the direct checks are they're given to everyone and not everyone needs them. And at the end of the day, too, it's more money that's being spent. We're all aware of our financial issues at the federal level, have a huge deficit. So you just have to weigh the pros and the cons. So, but it does include a lot. I'm drawing a blank on how many pages. I want to say that it's several hundred pages, which is not uncommon for legislation. I think, was it the Affordable Care Act? I'm not sure. I think the stack of that bill was I think approaching kind of a good foot of paper. So there's always a lot in these bills, but I think certainly there is, I mean, in my opinion, there's some aid needed, especially by small businesses. I think the individual checks, I do have some concern about them actually going to people who need them and not just sending out money. But it's hard to parcel that out.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. I think we're all, when we approach bills like this, it is hard to sort through the immense amount of language in it. It's also in very formal language that is difficult to understand sometimes. So I think, that provides a good summary of what could be in there. And, hopefully it starts conversations about the efficacy of some of those provisions within the bill. We are going to...
Oh, really quickly, I was going to say, just thinking about the fact that our government is meant, the Constitution is meant to force compromise. We see that in bills that, they pass bills, but when they vote, it's not that they necessarily agree with every single thing in the bill, but, you're going to add this in because I need that in. And there's an exchange of, okay, I'll support this piece if you support my piece. So it's definitely give and take. And these are very, very large bills that incorporate a lot of information, a lot of spending, $1.9 trillion. I might be showing my age, but I used to think that $1 billion was a lot, and now it's just $1 trillion. So, right, there's just a lot to unpack there. So we'll see what happens when it actually ends up on his desk.
Yes, 1.9 trillion. I can't even imagine. Even just handling something like that, I have no idea. So we do have one last question.
Okay.
Since Biden may very well be a one-term president, as you discussed earlier, do you think that his first 100 days are more crucial than his predecessors, especially 22 midterms and the 24 presidential election?
You cut out very briefly. Will you say the last part of that?
Yeah. So do you think his first 100 days are more crucial than his predecessors, especially given the rapidly approaching election cycle with the midterms and presidential election?
I think that's a good question. I think every day is important. I guess in some ways, almost feel like he needs a bit of an extension if we're going to think about this 100 days as a phenomenon and what you do right out of the gate. I mean, he certainly did with the executive orders, but there are a lot of limitations to what he can do in some areas. And again, looking through so much through the lens of COVID. But the congressional midterm elections are incredibly important. Generally, the party of the president loses seats. That is not always the case, but historically, that's the trend that we see. And that will make a huge difference, of course, if the Republicans regain the Senate or if they regain the House. So it's always important. I guess I would just, again, give him a little bit of breathing space to really get into his agenda and to really focus on some of these other issues after we get past the pandemic. The overshadowing of the impeachment. There's a lot of overhangs, I guess I would say. He didn't just get to walk into the White House on Inauguration Day and say, let's get started on XYZ. He has such a long list of things to deal with and other concerns that are taking attention away. So we'll see what the congressional elections look like. But again, historically, the party of the president loses seats. And so it'll be interesting to see if they can buck that trend.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. King, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you to all of the participants who joined us today. Our next Lunch and Learn will be on March 23rd from noon to 1. And it will cover a range of Charlotte-based topics, including the housing crisis, policing, schooling disparities, and food insecurity. So again, thank you so much, Dr. King, for being
here. Glad to be here.
I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
All right. Thank you.